Welcome to my channel, Love and Money. Here, we share stories about complicated relationships, betrayal, temptation, and matters of the heart. Today, you'll hear a story that will make you reflect on love, trust, and honesty. Michael had always thought he knew his wife, Emily, better than anyone else. He thought he knew the curve of her smile, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, and the precise timbre of her voice when she was irritated. But lately, something had shifted. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but enough to gnaw at the edges of his mind. A glance at her phone that she tried to hide too quickly. A laugh too soft, too fleeting, vanishing before he could ask what had amused her. The sense that she was somehow elsewhere. It started innocently enough. Emily had joined a gym downtown, and Michael had been fully supportive. Fitness was healthy, she had said, and he agreed. But then the little details began to accumulate. She spent more time in the locker room, even when she claimed to be just finishing her workout. She would come home, touch up her makeup in the bathroom mirror, and seem distracted, even distant. Once, he caught a faint trace of an unfamiliar cologne lingering on her hair. Michael tried to dismiss it at first. Stress, maybe. Work deadlines. People change, he told himself. Perhaps it was just the hustle of her new responsibilities. But the suspicion was like a small seed planted in fertile soil. Every unexplained smile, every hidden glance watered it. The turning point came one evening when Emily's phone buzzed loudly on the kitchen counter. Michael had no intention of prying, but the notification window flashed just long enough for him to glimpse a name he had never seen before. Marky Redheart. His stomach dropped. He stared at the screen, unable to believe what he had just seen. His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to appear calm. He asked casually, "Who's Marky?" Emily's head snapped up. Her eyes widened ever so slightly, just enough for Michael to notice. She quickly covered the phone, brushing off the question with a laugh. "Oh, that? Just a coworker. Nothing." But something in the way she said it made Michael pause. Her tone was too quick, too sharp, almost defensive. It wasn't just a casual dismissal. Something was wrong. That night, Michael lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Emily slept beside him, breathing softly, unaware of the storm swirling inside him. He replayed the day in his mind. Every laugh, every touch, every glance now carried the weight of suspicion. He wondered if he had been blind all this time, if the Emily he thought he knew was only part of her. By morning, he tried to act normal. He smiled, kissed her cheek, and said, "Good morning, love. Sleep well." She smiled back, oblivious to the battle raging inside him. But Michael knew one thing for certain. He could no longer ignore the feeling that something had changed, that the Emily he had married was no longer the woman lying beside him. He resolved to watch and wait, to observe, to gather evidence if necessary. Because deep down, he feared the truth would be far more complicated than he could bear, yet he knew he had to face it. Michael had entered a silent war, one in which the enemy was invisible and the battlefield was the fragile trust of marriage. And he didn't yet know that this was only the first chapter of a story that would unravel everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and betrayal. The morning after the phone notification, Michael tried to push away the uneasy feeling in his chest. He had convinced himself that maybe he was overreacting. Perhaps Marky was genuinely just a coworker, and the heart emoji was a silly joke. Yet, as Emily moved about the kitchen, pouring coffee with a light smile, Michael couldn't shake the nagging thought that something was amiss. A few days later, Emily returned from the gym, radiant as ever, chatting animatedly about a new friend she had made. "Her name's Anna," Emily said, her eyes shining. "She's amazing, married, but she has this incredible energy. You'd love her." Michael forced a smile, nodding. "That's great. Really." But his mind was racing. Married? Married to who? "A wealthy businessman," she had said. The details didn't matter to her when she spoke. They were only there to paint Anna as charismatic and inspiring. But to Michael, every word became a thread in a tangled web he couldn't yet see in full. Soon, Emily began planning more outings, lunches, yoga mornings, spa afternoons, all with Anna. Michael noticed a pattern. The outings were often longer than she initially described, sometimes stretching late into the evening. When he asked about her schedule, Emily would give vague responses, smiling gently, as if the questions themselves were an overreaction. Michael tried to maintain his composure. but he found himself counting hours until her returns. The late evenings became unbearable. Once, he arrived unexpectedly at a cafe where she had said she was meeting Anna for tea, only to see her quickly duck behind a corner table, a black SUV idling nearby. He recognized the vehicle from a magazine feature, the car of a prominent businessman named Mark Thompson. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a knot in his stomach, a certainty that he could no longer ignore. The combination of her laughter over text messages, the mysterious new friend, and glimpses of Mark Thompson's car outside made him feel as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He began to notice the small things that had escaped his attention before. The faint scent of expensive cologne lingering on her coat, the carefully chosen jewelry she wore after her outings, the way she would glance at her phone and smile when he wasn't looking. Each detail was like a puzzle piece, and though he didn't yet see the full picture, the image forming in his mind was dangerous, intoxicating, and frightening all at once. Michael didn't confront her, not yet. He resolved to watch, to learn, to wait for the moment when the truth could no longer hide behind polite smiles and casual reassurances. He had crossed the line from passive observer to silent investigator. And with each passing day, the invisible thread connecting Emily to Mark Thompson grew stronger, more tangled, and impossibly closer to unraveling everything he thought he knew about their life together. That night, Michael lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. The city lights flickered through the blinds, illuminating the quiet room. He listened to Emily's soft breathing and wondered how long it would take before the truth revealed itself, and whether he would be ready when it did. By midweek, Michael's unease had transformed into a gnawing tension that seemed to shadow him at every turn. He had learned to mask it in public, wearing the calm smile of a husband who trusted his wife implicitly. But at home, the air seemed heavier. He caught himself examining Emily in ways he never had before. The tilt of her head, the way her hair fell over her shoulders, the faint traces of makeup that seemed more deliberate than casual. It was on a Thursday evening that the most telling detail emerged. Emily returned from what she claimed had been a late evening at the office, supposedly helping a friend finish a design project. Michael greeted her at the door, trying to maintain normalcy, asking about her day. She spoke cheerfully, animated, detailing minor office anecdotes and jokes he had no context for. Then he noticed it. The scent. A subtle but unmistakable fragrance, rich, masculine, lingering in the strands of her hair and clinging faintly to the collar of her jacket. It wasn't a scent he recognized from her usual perfume or body lotion. No, this was different. Sharp, confident, expensive. It smelled like Mark Thompson, like power, wealth, and influence rolled into a single intoxicating aroma. Michael's heart tightened. He forced a smile. Must have been someone at the office, he muttered under his breath, not wanting to accuse. Not yet. Emily noticed him pause, cocking her head slightly. What is it? She asked. Nothing. Just smelled something different. Probably from your office. She nodded, accepting the explanation, but Michael didn't. He felt a sudden, fierce need to uncover the truth. The pattern was undeniable. Late nights, unexplained outings, faint traces of cologne, and now this. The subtle evidence that she had been in close proximity to someone else, someone who was not him. Dinner was a quiet affair. Emily laughed occasionally, but her laughter seemed hollow to Michael, the sound bouncing off the walls and returning to him with an edge of suspicion. Every movement she made, every sip of wine, every glance at her phone, was a potential clue. And Michael felt like a detective in his own home, mapping out possibilities, weighing the likelihood of betrayal against the life they had built together. After dinner, as Emily washed the dishes, Michael lingered near the counter. He wanted to confront her, to demand honesty, but a part of him knew that direct confrontation might drive her away or make her defensive. He needed proof. Not just a scent or a feeling, but something concrete, evidence that would confirm his worst fears or put them to rest forever. Later that night, he sat in the living room, scrolling through social media, hoping for a glimpse, a tagged photo, a story, a subtle clue that might reveal Mark's involvement. But nothing appeared. Every post from Emily was mundane. Coffee with friends, errands, gym selfies. The truth remained elusive, tantalizingly close, yet frustratingly out of reach. Michael realized that the danger of suspicion was its ability to grow unchecked in the mind. Each unexplained event became a new thread in an invisible web, pulling him closer to a reality he was not yet ready to face. And yet, he could not turn away. Every late-night text, every subtle detail, every faint trace of cologne was a signpost on the road to a revelation he feared but desperately needed. As he lay in bed that night, listening to Emily's steady breathing, he vowed silently. He would wait. He would watch. And when the truth finally revealed itself, he would be ready. But he had no idea just how close that truth already was. The next morning, Michael awoke with a restless energy that made it impossible to stay in bed. The previous night's revelation, the faint scent, the unease in Emily's demeanor, had grown into something sharper, more insistent. He couldn't push it aside, no matter how much he wanted to. Something was happening right under his nose, and he needed to know exactly what. Emily had gone out for her morning coffee, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter. Michael wasn't planning to snoop, but the screen lit up unexpectedly, displaying a notification that made him freeze in place. "Marky, can't wait to see you tonight." Michael's pulse quickened. The heart emoji, playful, intimate, unmistakable, turned suspicion into certainty. This wasn't a casual coworker. This wasn't just a friendly exchange. There was something personal, something forbidden in the words. He stared at the screen, his mind racing. He didn't move, didn't touch the phone. He simply watched, trying to process the implication. Every memory of the past few weeks, the late nights, the unexplained outings, the expensive perfume, now coalesced into a single, terrifying thought. Emily was involved with Mark Thompson. When Emily returned home, she didn't notice his tense posture or the way his eyes lingered on her. She moved through the kitchen with her usual grace, setting down her bag and smiling warmly. "Morning, love," she said. "Did you sleep well?" Michael forced a casual smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," he replied. "Did you have a good coffee?" "Wonderful," she said, pouring herself another cup. "You should try that new place downtown sometime. Anna told me it's amazing." Michael nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The casual way she mentioned Anna and, indirectly, Mark, only made the weight of his suspicion heavier. He decided to confront her carefully, not aggressively. "Emily, who's Marky?" Her head snapped up slightly, eyes widening, a faint blush creeping across her cheeks. She quickly covered the phone screen, giving a practiced laugh. "Oh, that? Just a coworker. Don't worry about it." But Michael noticed the slight defensiveness in her voice. Too quick, too sharp. She didn't fumble over her words. She delivered them with precision, a small shield against his scrutiny. His heart pounded. He wanted to ask more, to demand the truth, but he knew that pressing now could backfire. He needed something concrete. Evidence. Proof that could not be dismissed as paranoia. The day dragged on with Michael feeling like a detective in his own home. Every glance Emily cast at her phone, every smile, every casual remark became a potential clue. He replayed every interaction in his mind, analyzing, overanalyzing, and noticing details he had previously overlooked. By evening, he realized the truth was no longer a possibility. It was a probability. The casual narrative Emily had crafted about gym friends and evening outings was a veil, thin and fragile, over something far more dangerous. He could feel it in his gut. Mark Thompson was not just a coworker. He was wealthy, powerful, and likely aware of the effect he had on Emily. Michael's thoughts swirled with anger, betrayal, and helplessness. He could sense the tension building, like a storm gathering on the horizon. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The moment he had glimpsed the notification marked the tipping point. The line had been crossed, and the path ahead would force him to confront truths he wasn't ready for. That night, as Emily slept peacefully beside him, Michael lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The city lights outside flickered through the blinds, casting shadows across the room. He knew that the road ahead was dangerous, unpredictable, and filled with heartache. But he also knew he could not turn back. The truth was waiting, and sooner or later, it would reveal itself. Michael had reached a point where he could no longer rely on intuition alone. The combination of late-night outings, mysterious phone messages, and the faint traces of expensive cologne had pushed him into a state of cautious vigilance. He needed proof, something undeniable, something that would either confirm his suspicions or put his mind at ease once and for all. The first step was subtle. Michael did not confront Emily directly. Not yet. He knew that doing so without evidence could provoke defensiveness or even denial, and he needed clarity above all else. Instead, he began observing, noting patterns in her behavior, the time she left for the gym, the duration of her outings, her interactions with friends who had connections to Mark Thompson. That evening, after Emily left for one of her supposed yoga sessions with Anna, Michael sat alone in the living room, staring at the soft glow of the table lamp. He opened his laptop and began researching tracking apps, discrete tools designed for couples or families to keep track of devices, the sort that promised privacy, safety, and subtlety. He downloaded one, configured it, and tested it carefully. When it was ready, he installed it on Emily's phone under the guise of a new feature to help track shared schedules. She barely noticed, distracted by a text from Anna. Michael felt a mixture of anxiety and relief. This was a small invasion, yes, but necessary. He told himself it was temporary, a measure to gain clarity. Every notification, every location ping, every little digital breadcrumb would tell him the story he needed to see for himself. The following day, he checked the app surreptitiously while Emily was at work. The map was simple, yet powerful. It displayed her phone's location in real time. He saw her travel routes, the destinations she claimed were mundane, and quickly realized that there were discrepancies, brief stops, locations that didn't match her stated plans. Michael's pulse quickened. Each irregularity, while minor on its own, formed a pattern too consistent to ignore. He documented everything, screenshots, notes, times, and dates. It was methodical, obsessive even, but it gave him a sense of control he had not felt in weeks. The uncertainty had been eating at him, and now he could see threads, faint but real, of a truth that had been lurking just out of reach. By the evening, Michael had compiled a list of locations Emily had visited under false pretenses. Each one seemed to circle back to the same area, the district where Mark Thompson's offices and private residence were located. The thought made his stomach churn. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to see the tangible trails pointing directly to him. That night, Michael waited until Emily was asleep before reviewing the data again. He knew he was walking a dangerous line. Every step deeper into surveillance threatened to erode the trust that still remained in their relationship. But he couldn't stop now. Every detail mattered. Every subtle discrepancy could be a clue. The hours passed with a quiet intensity, the kind of tension that feels alive in the room. Michael's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, yet also with fleeting fantasies of confrontation. He envisioned the moment when he would have Emily's truth laid bare, every lie, every secret, every betrayal exposed. And when that day came, he promised himself there would be no ambiguity, no denials, no excuses. He didn't yet know when it would happen. He didn't know if Emily's heart was already divided, but he knew that the web of deceit, subtle though it might be, was growing, and that one day soon, it would collapse under its own weight. And Michael would be ready. It was a Friday evening when the pattern became undeniable. Emily appeared calm, radiant even, as she got ready for what she insisted was a girls' night out with Anna. Her laughter filled the apartment as she flitted around, choosing an outfit with practiced care. Every detail, the shimmer of her dress, the delicate earrings, the carefully styled hair, seemed designed to impress someone beyond the circle of her female friends. Michael watched from the doorway, heart pounding. He had rehearsed countless conversations, imagined countless confrontations, yet now words failed him. He simply smiled, a hollow gesture, and said, "Have fun, honey." Emily's grin widened. "Thanks, love. Don't wait up." Michael nodded, suppressing the ache in his chest. "Of course," he said, his voice steady, though the calmness was only skin deep. As soon as she left, Michael quietly opened the tracking app on his phone. He watched the map with a meticulous eye, almost holding his breath. At first, the route seemed consistent with the destination she had mentioned, a trendy downtown bar. But then the path deviated. The GPS showed a sharp turn, heading toward an area he knew too well, the upscale neighborhood where Mark Thompson's private estate was located. Michael's chest tightened. His suspicion had transformed into certainty. The casual, carefree way Emily had left the apartment, the laughter, the "don't wait up," all of it was a lie. And this was the proof. He tried to steady himself, but the emotions surged, betrayal, anger, and a deep, gnawing sadness. He knew that confronting her immediately could be catastrophic. If she sensed he had knowledge, she might cover her tracks, delete messages, even lie more convincingly. He needed more evidence, a definitive link that would leave no room for doubt. Hours passed. The city hummed outside, oblivious to the storm brewing in the small apartment. Michael scrolled through past messages, checking patterns, correlating times with locations. Every little inconsistency added fuel to the fire. The late nights, the mysterious coffees, the sudden errands, all pointed in one direction, toward Mark. He thought about the man he was up against. Mark Thompson wasn't just any man. He was powerful, wealthy, and used to getting whatever he wanted. And now, Emily was entangled in his world, a world of luxury, influence, and temptation. Michael realized that this wasn't just a matter of casual flirting or a fleeting affair. This was a deliberate crossing of lines, a deliberate step into a reality where he might have no control. Yet he also felt a strange, fierce determination. He would not be blindsided. He would not allow his marriage to be undone without understanding the full scope of what was happening. The first lie had been exposed, and now Michael knew that vigilance, patience, and strategy would be his only allies. When Emily finally returned late that night, she was slightly flushed, perfume lingering in the air, a soft smile on her lips. She seemed unaware of the storm within Michael. He simply nodded in greeting, keeping his expression neutral. "Long night?" he asked casually. Emily laughed lightly. "Just girls catching up. You know how it is." Michael's mind reeled. He nodded, holding back the questions that burned on his tongue. Tonight, the first lie had been proven, and he had seen where it led. But the deeper truths, the ones that would shatter illusions and hearts alike, were still waiting, just beyond reach. As he lay in bed that night, listening to Emily's soft breathing, Michael knew that the first lie was only the beginning. The path ahead was dangerous, unpredictable, and filled with heartache. But he would follow it to the end, no matter the cost. The weekend stretched before Michael like a fragile line of tension, each passing hour thickening the weight in his chest. He had maintained a careful balance all week, outwardly calm, polite, even affectionate when Emily was near, but inside, every nerve hummed with anticipation. He knew the truth was out there somewhere, waiting to be uncovered. Then it came. A message pinged on Emily's phone while she was supposedly out running errands. Michael had installed the tracking app not just to follow locations, but to receive notifications for messages and calls. When the alert appeared, he felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Mark." He stared at the screen, disbelief and fury warring inside him. The heart emoji, playful, intimate, impossible to ignore, confirmed everything he had feared. This wasn't just a casual flirtation or a harmless friendship. Emily's words left no ambiguity. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he held the phone. He wasn't sure whether to confront her immediately or continue gathering evidence. He wanted undeniable proof, but part of him ached to demand answers now. The hours of suspense had become unbearable. When Emily returned later that evening, she carried herself with her usual confident grace, oblivious to the storm raging in Michael's mind. He greeted her with a neutral smile, keeping his voice calm. "Hey, welcome back. How was your day?" Emily smiled, casually setting down her bag. "Good. Just errands and catching up with Anna. Nothing exciting." Michael nodded, hiding the anger that roared beneath the surface. He said nothing about the message. Not yet. Instead, he silently vowed to collect every detail, every piece of evidence, before confronting her. As the evening wore on, he noticed the subtle changes in her behavior. A flicker of guilt when she glanced at her phone, a faint hesitation in her laughter, a brief pause when discussing her day. Every little sign confirmed what he already knew. The relationship with Mark was real, and she was deliberately hiding it. Michael began formulating a plan. He didn't want an explosive confrontation that might destroy the chance of understanding the full scope of her betrayal. He needed a methodical approach: observe, document, and prepare. The goal was clarity, not revenge. That night, as Emily slept, Michael lay awake, reviewing every text, every suspicious outing, every inconsistency he had noted over the past weeks. The message on her phone had changed everything. It had turned a simmering suspicion into a tangible, undeniable reality. He knew one thing for certain. The world he thought he understood, the life, the love, the trust he had shared with Emily, was unraveling. And soon, the truth would demand a reckoning. That night stretched endlessly for Michael. The apartment was quiet, but the silence felt heavy, pressing down on him from all sides. Every tick of the clock was a reminder of what he had discovered, the message from Mark, and yet he could not act. He was trapped between the desire to confront Emily and the need to gather evidence. He sat in the living room, staring at the soft glow of the table lamp. The city outside hummed with life, oblivious to the storm raging inside his home. His thoughts circled obsessively around every interaction he had witnessed, every late night she had spent away, and the faint smell of someone else lingering in her coat. The details formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Michael replayed the past weeks in his mind, dissecting each moment. The casual phone calls that lasted longer than necessary, the dinners she said were with friends but never mentioned their names, the unexplained gifts she brought home, all pointed to a hidden reality. He felt a surge of anger, mingled with a profound sadness. This was not just betrayal. It was the dismantling of the life he had believed was secure. He thought about confronting her, imagining the words he might say. Would he be calm, measured, and controlled? Or would the years of betrayal pour out in a torrent of emotion he could not contain? The uncertainty made him restless. He walked from room to room, unable to sit still, each step echoing in the otherwise silent apartment. Hours passed, and Michael's mind remained a battlefield. He thought about their marriage, the love they had shared, and the trust that now seemed so fragile. He wondered if Emily even realized the depth of the damage her actions had caused. Did she understand the consequences of her choices? Or had the allure of wealth and attention from Mark blinded her completely? By the time the first light of dawn seeped through the blinds, Michael was exhausted. His eyes were heavy, but his mind refused to rest. He had reached a turning point. He could no longer ignore the truth, nor could he allow it to fester in silence. Something had to give. As Emily slept peacefully, unaware of the emotional turmoil enveloping Michael, he made a silent vow. When the time came, he would confront her, but not in anger, not in accusation. He would face the reality with clarity, with proof, and with the understanding that his actions from this point forward would determine the rest of his life. The night had been long, perhaps the longest he had ever endured, but it had also solidified his resolve. Whatever lay ahead, revelation, confrontation, or heartbreak, he would be ready. The next morning, the apartment was filled with an uncomfortable quiet. Emily moved through the rooms with her usual grace, humming softly, making coffee, checking her phone, while Michael sat at the table, pretending to read the news. But the air between them was different now. Heavy, tense. Every word unsaid seemed to echo louder than anything they could have spoken. He watched her closely. Every gesture, every glance at her phone, every nervous flick of her hair. She looked calm on the surface, but he could sense something beneath it, a guardedness, a subtle distance. They were still together physically, yet emotionally, they were standing on opposite sides of an invisible wall. "Big plans today?" he asked, his voice even. Emily smiled faintly, without meeting his eyes. "Just lunch with Anna. Maybe some shopping after." Michael nodded slowly, the words sinking in. "Anna again." He forced a polite smile. "You two have been spending a lot of time together lately." Emily paused, a flicker of tension crossing her face. "Yeah, well, she's been helping me with some personal stuff. You know, just girl things." Michael said nothing. The lie was almost elegant in its simplicity. She had grown skilled at weaving believable stories, soft enough to deflect suspicion but not detailed enough to invite questions. It wasn't the first time she had used Anna as a cover, and it likely wouldn't be the last. The silence returned. Emily finished her coffee and left soon after, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek before disappearing through the door. The gesture felt mechanical, rehearsed. The warmth that had once defined their marriage was gone, replaced by a performance that fooled only those who wanted to be fooled. Michael sat there long after she left, the taste of cold coffee on his tongue. He stared at the door, listening to the faint echo of her footsteps fading down the hall. His chest tightened. He wasn't angry anymore, not exactly. What he felt now was deeper, more hollow. It was the quiet ache of realizing that love had been replaced by deception. The hours dragged on. He worked, or at least tried to, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her. Every few minutes, he checked the tracking app. Her location bounced from one spot to another, a cafe downtown, then a high-end boutique, and finally, an unfamiliar address on the edge of the city. He copied the address into a map. It was a luxury apartment building, one that matched Mark Thompson's neighborhood. The pieces were coming together faster now, each discovery slicing deeper into the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he was wrong. By evening, Emily returned, smiling as if nothing was amiss. Traffic was awful, she said, hanging up her coat. Anna and I had such a great time, though. You should come with us next time. Michael looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Maybe I will, he said quietly. It'd be nice to meet her. Emily froze for a moment, just a second too long. Then she laughed lightly, brushing it off. You'd probably be bored. We just talk about boring stuff. Maybe, he replied, still watching her carefully. But sometimes boring things can be interesting. The room fell silent again. Only the sound of rain against the windows filled the space between them. Emily busied herself with dinner, but Michael noticed her hands trembling slightly as she chopped vegetables. For the first time, he knew she could feel it too, the growing weight of the truth pressing closer each day. That night, when they went to bed, they lay side by side, facing opposite directions. Neither spoke. The silence between them said everything. Michael had rehearsed the confrontation in his head 100 times. He imagined storms of shouting, bitter accusations spat into the kitchen light. He imagined quiet, dignified departures. He imagined tears and apologies, thin as tissue, that might or might not mean anything. But rehearsals were fantasies, tidy, contained, and unreal. Real life tended to spill over the edges. It began with a simple impulse. If the tracking app placed Emily near Mark's neighborhood again, he would follow. He would see, with his own eyes, what the phone claimed to show. He would gather proof that could not be argued away. It wasn't revenge so much as necessity, a need for certainty before making decisions that would change everything. On a Tuesday morning, Emily left for a meeting and, as usual, left her phone on the kitchen counter. The app pinged its location, an address within the circle of expensive villas and guarded gates. Michael waited until she was out of sight, then slipped into his coat, told his colleague he had a sudden errand, and drove. The city opened and closed around him like a book being read too quickly. He kept the engine steady and his hands calm. Panic had no use when precision was required. The estate looked like something from a lifestyle magazine. Sculpted hedges, a white stone facade, modern glass windows, and a black SUV idling near the circular driveway. Security camera domes glinted like unblinking eyes. He circled the property once, then twice, keeping a discreet distance. His heart thudded in his chest, not from fear so much as from the steady, intimate dread of being right. A valet waved him toward a cafe on the corner, an excuse he used to park and watch. Over black coffee, he watched doors open and close, watched figures stride between the estate and the city like chess pieces moving on a board. He saw staff, drivers, guests. He saw Mark Thompson once, crossing the plaza with the air of a man who expected the world to bend. He saw Emily later, slim silhouette in a coat, laughing with someone by the fountain. Mark's profile unmistakable, tall, confident, perfectly groomed. Michael's stomach dropped as if someone had punched him. Seeing them together made the evidence visceral. It was no longer a line on a map or a cryptic message. It was real people laughing in daylight, unconcerned, as if nothing in the world could touch them. Michael's impulse was to walk up to them, to demand an explanation so loud and sharp it would cut the day in two. Instead, he ordered another coffee and let the shaking in his hands pass. He watched Emily step into the SUV with Mark. The car pulled away, glinting chrome under the sun. He followed, keeping a safe distance. The route wove through wide streets and past manicured parks until they reached an area of private residences. The SUV eased down a quiet lane and stopped before a discreet gate. A security guard scanned a card, nodded, and the vehicle slipped inside. Michael parked his car 2 blocks away, left the engine on, and walked back to the gate. He stood there a long time, feeling the weight of something closing around him, an invisible clasp that made every breath taste metallic. The guard asked his business. Michael mumbled something about a wrong turn, about appreciating the architecture. The man's cool stare made him feel both ridiculous and exposed. He wanted a confrontation with Mark more than anything, but that desire was tangled now with the terror of the unknown. What if Emily did not want to be rescued? What if she had already chosen? He positioned himself in the shadows of a sycamore and watched the estate from a distance. Through the glass, he glimpsed the house's interior. Art on the walls, soft lighting, a world of items he could not afford and did not want to need. But what struck him most was how small and private the scene inside seemed. An island of plush comfort in which a man like Mark could assemble the things he wanted, including, it seemed, people. Hours passed. Michael took notes on his phone, times, license plates, who entered and exited. He cataloged everything with a meticulousness that felt like armor. In that quiet surveillance, he discovered something else, a deeper sympathy for himself. He had been a man who built his life on ordinary values: work, loyalty, small kindnesses. He had not planned for the seduction of money, for how ordinary doubt could be eroded by gifts, invitations, and the comparative luxury that Mark could provide. He felt both betrayed and foolish, as if the castle of his life had been built without considering all the weather it might face. When the SUV reappeared late in the afternoon, Michael followed at a measured distance until it stopped near a boutique hotel in the center of town. He watched Emily step out, hair slightly ruffled, the same polite smile she wore at home flattened into something practiced. Mark directed her with a casual hand across the small of her back. The sight made Michael feel suddenly obscene, an intruder watching moments that should have been private. Yet he could not turn away. The confirmation he had chased all morning was there, but not in the neat, satisfying way he had imagined. There was no melodramatic embrace, no scandalous tableau to photograph and hold up as proof. There were only ordinary gestures, the laugh at a joke, the soft touch on an elbow, the way someone else's presence shifted the way she smiled. It was enough. It was worse than he had feared and more complicated than he had imagined. After the car ride, Michael drove home through a fog of conflicting emotions. He had the proof he wanted, and now he had to decide what to do with it. Confrontation felt suddenly small against the enormity of the decision ahead. This was not a scene to be managed instantaneously. It would change the trajectories of several lives. That evening, Emily arrived later than usual. She smelled faintly of Mark's cologne. She stepped inside and paused, eyes scanning the living room before she spoke. "Hey," she said, voice measured. Traffic was brutal. Michael watched her, quiet, hands folded in his lap. "Traffic, huh?" he said. She sat across from him, trying to meet his gaze. "Michael, you look tired." "I followed you today," he said simply. Her expression flickered, as if an internal current passed through her. "You what?" "You left for a meeting," he said, "but your GPS went elsewhere." "I went to see." He kept the words flat, controlled, because he wanted clarity, not the theatrics of an explosion. She inhaled sharply, then exhaled, a small, brittle laugh escaping her. "Why would you do that?" she asked, voice edged with hurt. Hurt that felt practiced. "Because I had to know," Michael replied. "Because waiting and doubting until my head split seemed worse than seeing the truth." Emily's composure began to crack. Tears sprang to her eyes. And for a moment Michael saw not a calculating figure, but a human being cornered, frail and panicked. "I didn't mean for," she started. "Did any of this start because of money?" he asked. His voice was low. The question weighted not with accusation, but with a devastating mixture of curiosity and pain. She flinched. "It's complicated," she whispered. He helps me with projects. He takes care of things. He made an offer for a collaboration. He said he could help put my career on a different path." "And you?" I felt seen," she admitted, voice trembling. "With you I am comfortable. With him I feel like I could be more. It's not right. I know that." For a long silence, only the hum of the refrigerator filled the kitchen. Michael felt the world tilt, like a ship that had taken on a sudden list. The man he loved stood before him wearing a truth he hadn't expected to find. "Seen," he repeated softly. "Seen how? As someone you were missing, or as someone who could buy what we didn't have?" Emily swallowed. "Both." The admission landed like a fist. Michael felt the sting, but also a strange clarity. The problem was not only infidelity. It was the presence of a gulf between them, one he had not noticed until it yawned wide enough to swallow trust and replace it with a hunger that could be purchased. He thought of the life they had built, modest, attentive, quietly anchored. He thought of the nights they laughed at small jokes and the mornings they shared coffee. None of those moments felt fake now. They were simply no longer enough in the way Emily needed. "What happens now?" he asked, because despite the ache, despite the humiliation, he needed direction. Emily's eyes filled. "I don't know," she said honestly. I thought I could have both. I was wrong." "You chose to hide it," Michael said. "You chose to step into a world of secrets without telling me." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I am." The words were small and insufficient. Michael didn't know if an apology could rebuild a foundation undermined by choices made for causes beyond love. He rose from his chair and walked to the window, watching the street light glint in the evening rain. The confrontation he had imagined, a loud, cleansing storm, had arrived not as catharsis but as a thinning of air. It solved nothing. It clarified everything. It showed the divide. It offered no easy fix. When he turned back, Emily was standing, tears streaking her cheeks, raw and vulnerable. "I wish I hadn't let it happen," she said. "I wish I could undo it." "Wishes don't change decisions," he said, voice steady. "They just show how much we want to pretend we can go back." She nodded, and for the first time since this had begun, Michael felt the enormity of what had been betrayed. Not just fidelity, but the mutual faith that had once been the scaffolding of their lives. He didn't yet know whether he would stay or leave. He only knew that nothing after tonight could be the same. Michael arranged the meeting with the sort of careful, nervous calibration that comes when someone is balancing the need for answers against the risk of making a situation worse. He told himself it was only a coffee, an attempt to understand the man whose presence had unsettled his marriage. The more honest part of him admitted that it was also an attempt to reclaim some dignity, to stand face to face with the person who had been casually reshaping his wife's world. He chose a neutral place, a small cafe in a business district, where people disappeared into the rhythm of meetings and takeaway orders, where no one lingered to watch a private difficulty unfold. He arrived early, sat at a corner table, and watched the door with a tension that made his palms feel thick and foreign. He rehearsed sentences in his head like a script, but when Mark walked in, polished, confident, expensive, the rehearsed lines felt flimsy. Mark Thompson had the kind of presence that filled a room without needing to speak. Tailored suit, easy smile, and a posture that suggested the world often bent in his favor. He moved with the composure of a man used to attention and interpreted it as a natural right. When he extended his hand to Michael, the grip was firm and practiced, businesslike, not friendly. "Michael, isn't it? Emily's husband. Good to finally meet you," Mark said, with a tone too smooth to be entirely sincere. Michael stood, returned the handshake, and kept his voice flat as he invited the meeting's purpose. "Thank you for seeing me. I wanted to talk about Emily." Mark's face registered a quick, polite surprise, then nothing. "Of course. Emily's a talented designer. We've been discussing some collaborative work." He sat down as if he was offering a casual invitation rather than explaining an entanglement. Michael watched him, studying each micro-expression, looking for arrogance, flippancy, anything that would justify the anger that sat behind his ribs. Mark's manner was disarming. He spoke in even, measured sentences that suggested generosity rather than conquest. "I like to support talent," Mark said. "If I can help someone's career, why wouldn't I?" It was the sort of logic that smelled like power, the ability to fix careers with a signature and the assumption that people should be grateful for the uplift. Michael felt the edge of humiliation again, not because Emily had been flattered or pursued, but because she had been attracted to a world he felt excluded from, a world that Mr. Thompson's presence made effortlessly available. "So this is professional?" Michael asked, because he needed it defined. The word professional was a lifeline he could cling to. If this was strictly an arrangement of mutual career advancement, the betrayal would sit differently than if his suspicion of intimacy had merit. Mark shrugged in that practiced way of men who could afford not to be pinned down. "Professional connections often cross into the social. It's inevitable. We have dinners. We meet. People get along. But that doesn't mean anything more than a business relationship. You know how it is in our circles." Michael could hear the implication. In Mark's world, lines were blurry because he defined the terms. "You met her because of work," Michael said. And you've been taking her to these events? Yes, Mark admitted. She's worked on a concept for a client. I invested in her direction. I offer advice, introductions, opportunities she didn't have before. He paused, watching Michael's reaction as carefully as if he were gauging a market. And gifts? Michael pressed. Jewelry, dinners, trips? Mark leaned back and smiled, a measured expression that was more studying than gentle. I like to ensure people are comfortable when they explore opportunities. Tokens of appreciation, if you will. These are gestures, Michael, not obligations. There was a line in Mark's voice that made Michael feel suddenly like a man explaining his budget to a banker. Small, inadequate, and easily dismissed. Michael tried not to let his emotions rule him, but the humiliation had teeth. He had not built a life of luxury, and now that reality itself felt like a weakness that others could exploit. You understand how this looks, Michael said. You understand she's my wife. Whether you call it gestures or tokens, there's a line. Mark's eyes were reasonable, almost weary. I understand, he said. I'm not trying to take anyone. I respect relationships. If Emily wants advice, I offer it. If she wants to take opportunities one provide, I support her. That's all. Michael wanted to be furious. He wanted to say things that would sting, that would expose Mark's casual assumption of power. Instead, he heard himself ask the thing that hurt the most. Have you been intimate with her? For a moment, Mark's face hardened, then smoothed again. No, he said, simply. We haven't crossed that line. It should have been relief. Instead, Michael felt the room contract, the knife of the unknown pressing in. Mark's no felt like a polished reply, crafted to protect reputation. Michael knew how easily a man could compartmentalize his actions in ways others could not see. The word no did not undo the image of Emily in a black SUV, stepping into a world Michael could not match. You understand faithfulness is more than the act, Michael said. It's trust. It's being honest. Mark's expression flickered. Maybe irritation, maybe condescension. Of course. But we aren't children. People make choices. Some of them are not black and white. He said it like an observation, not a justification. Michael swallowed. He realized the conversation would be unproductive if it turned into a moral debate. He had not come to win an argument. He had come to get a read on the man behind the charm. What he came away with was the sense that Mark saw relationships as transactional elements of a larger life. Resources to be used, not sacred trusts. After some more careful questioning, Michael left the cafe with a strange mix of emotions. Mark had shown him courtesy and a practiced denial. Denials that were plausible, that a court might accept. But Michael had also felt the soft pressure of the man's worldview, that his wealth and influence created flexibility where other people had rigid boundaries. That pressure was suffocating. On his way out, Michael's phone vibrated with a message from Emily. How did it go? He stared at the text, feeling the smallness of it, the casual tone of a woman who might now be tiptoeing around the edges of the life she had with him. He typed back a short, controlled line. We talked. We're not done. He didn't want to squander words. He had learned that night that he was not fighting a single person. He was fighting a system of comforts that could upend people quietly and make the other party feel inadequate or ungrateful. Emily's attraction to Mark, he realized, had less to do with pure malice and more to do with the seductive ease of a life reimagined. That night, Michael sat alone in their living room, looking at the 2 cups of coffee still cooling on the table. He felt the absence of easy answers. He was convinced that Mark had not overtly crossed certain visible lines, yet everything about the situation felt transgressive. It wasn't just about fidelity in the physical sense. It was fidelity to a life, to honest sharing, to telling the truth before choices were made. He also knew, perhaps more clearly than before, that his next steps needed to be as strategic as the life he had been thrown into confronting. This was not a showdown to be won by theatrics. It would require resolve, patience, and a willingness to protect himself not only emotionally but practically. If he was to rebuild, whether that meant repair or separation, he needed evidence, clarity, and the courage to see himself as more than the man the world would measure against wealth. In the quiet that settled over the apartment, Michael allowed himself one honest thought. He loved Emily, but love alone might not be enough to navigate the gravity of what Mark represented. The meeting had clarified that. It had given him the face of the obstacle and the understanding that the challenge before him was bigger than a single conversation. He would need to decide, in the days that followed, whether he would fight for the marriage on the terms he believed in, or whether the damage was already too great. For now, he accepted the tension as part of his new reality and steeled himself for what would come next. Michael had never been good at pretending. It was one of those small truths about him. He wore his emotions on the inside as honestly as if they were clothes, and people usually noticed. But now, trapped in the slow, deliberate decay of his marriage, he learned a new skill out of necessity: performance. Not the kind of performance that requires applause, but a careful, surgical suppression of reaction. He would play ignorant, he told himself. He would watch. He would gather. He would wait for the moment when evidence could not be spun into excuses. The days after his meeting with Mark were like walking through glass. Every step warranted caution. Every word might shatter something beyond repair. At home, Michael adopted a new demeanor. He was polite, easy, almost generous with small courtesies. He asked about Emily's day and listened to her rehearsed narratives. He even made plans he had no intention of keeping, took an interest in the people she mentioned, and nodded when she described dinners and meetings. The performance was exhausting, but it kept her from closing ranks. If she thought he was unaware, she would let her guard down, and the guard is where truth often slipped through. Emily, for her part, seemed to breathe a little easier. Whatever guilty tension had been in her shoulders smoothed when she assumed Michael hadn't pieced the pattern together. She laughed more freely when he was around, sometimes leaning into him in public with a lightness that made his chest crack like thin ice. Those moments were the worst, glimpses of the life he knew, then snatched away by the knowledge beneath. There were practical reasons for his strategy as well. Confrontation, without proof, could play into Mark's hands. A man with influence and money could craft a narrative that made Michael look jealous, obsessive, perhaps even vindictive. If push came to shove, he wanted the moral high ground to rest on facts, not feelings. Facts could be shown to a counselor, lawyer, or friend. Feelings could be dismissed as paranoia. So Michael cataloged instead of accusing. He photographed locations on maps, saved screenshots of times, noted discrepancies between stories and movements. He kept a notebook that he carried like a talisman, scrawled in the margins with times and small observations. It felt petty in one light and vital in another. At work, Michael was careful to be his usual steady self. He found routine comforting: the hum of a computer, the clack of keys, the ordinariness of deadlines. It was a place he could go to forget for a while. He arrived early and left late, sometimes to avoid the house when Emily's meetings ran unpredictably long. He found himself watching her social media not to spy on pictures, but to look for details. Was she tagged at certain events? Did Mark appear, even peripherally, in photos? He would scroll through months of images searching for aberrations, the same way a detective might compare handwriting to a sample. One evening, Emily told him they had been invited to a dinner at a patron's home. She sounded almost apologetic, as if she were sharing a trivial inconvenience. "It's the new gallery patron," she said. "He wants to meet a few artists. Anna and I are going. It's tomorrow. You can come if you want." Michael considered saying yes. For a moment, the old instinct, part pride, part territoriality, wanted him there. But he thought of Mark, and how naturally Mark moved through rooms full of people who mattered. He thought of his unremarkable suit and his tired smile. He thought of how being present might expose his rawness rather than protect him. "I have an early meeting," he said. "You should go. It might be a good opportunity." She kissed his cheek. "Thanks for understanding." The kiss was light, grateful. She left him standing in the hallway like a man at a station platform watching a train pull away without him. That night, he didn't sleep much. He replayed the small decision again and again, torn between the urge to demonstrate a united front and the need to preserve his dignity. When she left for the dinner, he watched from the window as she stepped into the back of Mark's SUV. The sight was a cold stone in his chest, possessive, shameful, private. He felt like a man whose life was being shown to a stranger through a slot in a fence. But the most painful aspect of his self-imposed silence was the way Emily seemed to compartmentalize. She would come home and tuck her secrets into neat drawers, closing them with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to live double. She had a laugh for him, a laugh for Mark, and a laugh she reserved for when she was alone with her phone. These were not all the same. Michael's performance required him to play along with her. He feigned interest in Anna's projects. He shared smiley emojis in response to her excited announcements. He even suggested optimistic things like, maybe you should say yes to that gallery, get your name out there. The lies were small and soft, but he felt them acutely, each one a stitch in a costume he wished he could throw away. There were difficult moments when the instinct to save everything nearly overrode strategy. Once, when Emily mentioned a trip Mark had offered her to view a designer's collection abroad, Michael's hands tightened around his cup until it left crescent moons on the ceramic. He did not lash out. He asked instead, quietly and deliberately, "Do you feel pressured or excited?" Emily's face flickered with something like guilt. "It's exciting," she said after a pause. "It feels like a door opening." "Why is that so bad?" "Because when doors open to places you can't share," he said, "sometimes the hallway you had together starts to feel too narrow." The earnestness of the sentence surprised even him. Emily's eyes found his. For a moment, there was an unguarded sadness. She reached out and placed a hand over his on the table. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered. I don't know how to explain it." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to collapse into the simplicity of that phrase and hold her until the world righted itself. But the evidence he had collected, and his one clear memory of messages and locations, was louder than her whispered regrets. Still, for the sake of the plan, he let her hand rest in his and let the illusion of normalcy last an hour longer. Part of playing dumb involved testing boundaries in small ways. Michael began to leave trivial things in places where she could see them or where she might forget them. An old postcard from a trip, a book she liked, a sweater laid out on a chair. When she reached for a scarf that belonged to a client, he let himself notice the little changes, the items that smelled of other men, the jewelry he could not have afforded on his salary. He didn't make a scene. He notated, stored away like a librarian of regrets. He also watched Mark in the periphery of his life, through brief interactions, through secondhand stories from other artists, and through the way the city seemed to rearrange itself to accommodate Mark's will. Mark's name carried weight. Invitations issued by him came with expectations and a certain kind of currency. To Michael, it felt as if his wife was being offered a new map to navigate, one that required a passport he could not produce. Weeks turned into a strange limbo where nothing major erupted and everything had shifted. Playing dumb had a cost. It taught Michael to live with a slow-burning wound that did not heal. Some nights, he would wake with the memory of Emily's laughter in someone else's company, a sound that once signaled love now echoing like a bell tolling for the end of something. Other nights, he would find himself smiling at old pictures where her hand was in his and feeling nostalgically protective rather than possessive. The performance did what it was intended to do. It kept Emily from closing her world entirely, and it allowed Michael to keep exploring the seams. He collected proof with the patience of a man making amends with himself, slowly, meticulously, without fanfare. He knew, as he filled his notebook and saved files of innocuous conversations and location pins, that the truth he sought would not be a dramatic thunderclap, but a quiet accumulation of facts that could not be denied. And so he played dumb. He went to work. He smiled when she texted him heart emojis, and he watched her move through the rooms of their life like a person who had begun to live two parallel stories. He told himself it was temporary, that the pretense would end once the evidence lay out on the table where it could not be waved away. He told himself he had the strength to do what needed to be done. But on the nights when the house was truly silent, when the city seemed to dim around the edges, Michael allowed himself a private and terrible longing, that the thing he loved would return to him, not because he had forced it back, but because she had realized, in the private hours that followed louder pleasures, who she had been with all along. The rain had a way of softening the edges of the city. Buildings looked less certain under gray skies, and people moved faster, as if afraid to linger long enough for the truth to find them. For Michael, the storm outside mirrored the one inside him. Quiet, steady, impossible to ignore. He had waited long enough. The proof was there now, a collection of small truths that, together, painted a picture he could no longer deny. Text messages, shared locations, receipts from restaurants that weren't business dinners. The moments all aligned too perfectly. So when he called Mark that afternoon, his voice was calm, controlled, almost polite. "Mark, it's Michael." A pause. Then, the familiar, smooth tone on the other end. Michael, this is unexpected. Yeah, Michael replied. We need to talk. In person. A short silence. Then, my office. 6 o'clock. Come alone. The sun had already dipped below the skyline by the time Michael arrived. Mark's office sat on the top floor of a glass tower overlooking the river. Everything about the space radiated confidence. Modern art on the walls, leather furniture, a faint scent of cedar and money in the air. Mark was by the window, looking out at the rain. He turned as Michael entered, smiling faintly. You look tense. Whiskey? No. Suit yourself. Mark poured a glass anyway, sipping it as he studied him. So what brings you here? Trouble in paradise. Michael's jaw tightened. You know exactly why I'm here. Mark tilted his head slightly, as if amused by a child's attempt to act brave. You're going to have to be more specific. I deal with a lot of people's problems. Michael stepped closer. Emily. You and her. For a moment, Mark didn't react. Then he chuckled softly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. You make it sound so dramatic. I didn't take her from you, Michael. She made her own choice. Her choice. Michael's voice stayed even, but his pulse hammered. You manipulated her. You used your money, your influence, your charm. Mark interrupted him with a small, dismissive wave. No one forces anyone. She was unhappy long before I appeared. You must know that. Michael's chest tightened. The words hit too close to the wound he tried to hide. You don't know anything about our marriage. On the contrary, Mark said, setting down his glass. I know exactly what she told me. That she felt invisible. That you loved her like a memory, something to preserve, not something alive. She needed to feel seen, and I happened to be there when you weren't. The words were surgical, precise, cruel in their calmness. Michael wanted to shout, to break something, but instead he stood still, forcing himself to breathe. You talk like this is some philosophical debate, he said quietly. But it's not. It's two people you've broken just to feed your ego. Mark smirked. You think too small. This isn't about ego. It's about connection. People outgrow each other. She outgrew you. Michael stared at him for a long time. There was no remorse in Mark's expression, no hint of doubt. Just certainty, the kind that comes from living a life where consequences rarely stick. You know, Michael said finally, I used to think men like you won because you were smarter. But now I see it's just because you've never had to lose. Mark's smile faded slightly. Be careful, Michael. You're standing on ground you don't understand. Maybe not, Michael said, turning toward the door. But at least I'm still standing. He left the office without another word. The rain outside hit his face like small needles, sharp and real. For the first time in months, he felt something close to relief. Not because he had won, but because the lies were finally done pretending to be anything else. When Emily came home that night, she found Michael sitting at the kitchen table. No phone, no laptop, no distractions, just him, waiting. The lights were low, the air heavy with quiet. She paused at the doorway, her keys still in her hand, sensing something different in the way he looked at her. Michael, she asked softly, what's going on? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit down, Emily. She hesitated, then obeyed. Her pulse quickened, though she tried to hide it. She had rehearsed dozens of conversations in her head, excuses, justifications, explanations, but the stillness in his eyes told her this wouldn't be one of those. He already knew. Michael exhaled slowly. I saw him today. Mark. Her face paled, just slightly, but enough for him to see. You saw him? Yes. We talked. He leaned forward, his voice calm but cold. He told me everything. Emily's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Everything. Enough, he said. Enough to stop pretending. There was no anger in his tone, and somehow, that made it worse. If he had shouted, if he had slammed his fist, she could have defended herself, fought back. But the quiet acceptance in his voice tore through her armor. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, finally, she spoke, not with defiance, but with exhaustion. I didn't plan for it to happen. Not like that. Michael's jaw flexed. Then tell me how it did happen. She looked down at her hands, her voice trembling. You remember when my art show was canceled? The one I spent months preparing for. He nodded. That night, I felt like everything I'd worked for just disappeared. I was small, invisible. Mark was at the event, not as a guest, just passing through. He said a few kind words. offered to introduce me to people who could help. She laughed bitterly. It sounded so innocent back then. Michael stayed silent. I kept telling myself he was just helping me rebuild, she continued. But somewhere along the way, I started depending on his approval. He made me feel talented again, wanted again. Every compliment was like oxygen, and I didn't realize how much I was suffocating until someone finally noticed. Her voice cracked at the last word. Michael looked at her for a long moment. And you didn't think I noticed you? She met his eyes, tears welling up. You did, but it was different. You loved me the way you love something safe, something certain. I became a part of your routine, comfortable, reliable, but not alive. I needed to feel like more than someone's habit. The words cut deep, but they were honest. Painfully honest. Michael stood and walked to the window. The city lights flickered on wet glass, blurring into gold and gray. So that's your truth, he said quietly. You were unhappy, and he was convenient. No, she said firmly. He wasn't convenient. He was dangerous. But I was tired of being careful. You used to look at me like I was your world, and then one day, it felt like you just stopped seeing me. I didn't know how to bring us back. Michael turned to her, eyes full of hurt and disbelief. And you thought this would fix it? No, she whispered. I thought it would remind me who I was. But instead, it reminded me who I lost. The silence between them lingered, not angry, but heavy with the weight of truth finally spoken. After a long pause, Michael asked, Do you still love him? Emily shook her head slowly. No, I don't think I ever really did. I loved what I felt when I was with him. The illusion of being seen, admired. But it was never love. It was escape. Michael studied her face, searching for something: sincerity, regret, hope. He found traces of all three. Then what do you want now? He asked. Her answer came in a whisper. I want to find out if there's anything left of us to save. Michael looked down at his hands, the same hands that once held hers through every milestone of their life together. For the first time, he didn't know whether to reach for her or let her go. Morning came quietly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving behind a gray calm that felt almost too gentle for the weight inside their home. Emily sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the untouched cup of coffee on the table. Michael was across the room, standing by the bookshelf, tracing his fingers absent-mindedly over the spines of their shared past. Novels they once read together, travel guides from trips they'd dreamed of taking, photo albums collecting dust. Each object was a small echo of who they used to be. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Emily broke the silence. You haven't said what you're going to do. Michael didn't turn around. I don't know yet. She nodded, her voice small. That's fair. There was something deeply human about that exchange. Two people caught between anger and empathy, unsure which one deserved to win. Michael turned toward her at last. I don't hate you, Emily. Her eyes flicked up in surprise. He continued, his tone quiet but steady. I should. I've tried to. But I don't. I'm just tired. Tired of feeling like I have to fight for someone who already left. Emily's throat tightened. I didn't mean to leave you. You didn't have to mean it, he said gently. You just did. Tears filled her eyes. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance. But something in his expression told her that the time for simple gestures had passed. There were some wounds that no amount of apologies could heal quickly. They had to be lived through, not patched over. Do you remember, she said suddenly, that weekend we got lost on the coast? The one where the GPS broke and we ended up at that tiny motel by the beach. Michael smiled faintly, the first real smile in days. Yeah, you kept saying we'd freeze, and then we found that old diner that served soup until midnight. You said it was the best soup you'd ever had, she said, a soft laugh slipping through the sadness. It was, he replied, because of who I was sitting with. The warmth in that memory hung between them like fragile glass, something beautiful that could shatter if either of them breathed too hard. After a while, Emily spoke again. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not sure I deserve it. But I want you to know I'm done lying. Not just to you, to myself. Michael walked to the window. Outside, the sky was clearing, streaks of pale sunlight breaking through. Forgiveness isn't a door you just walk through, he said. It's more like a bridge. And right now, I'm not sure I can see the other side. Emily nodded slowly. Then I'll wait. He turned back to her, eyes tired but honest. Don't wait for me. Wait for yourself. Figure out who you are without him, without this chaos. Because if you come back, I need to know it's really you, not someone running from guilt. Her tears finally fell, silent and unforced. I understand. Michael took a deep breath, as if gathering years of emotion into one slow exhale. I'm going to stay with my brother for a while. We both need space. Okay, she whispered. Just don't disappear completely. He gave her a small, bittersweet smile. I won't. But maybe disappearing for a little while is what we both need. He picked up his bag, already packed. For a moment, he hesitated at the doorway. Then he turned back and said, softly, I don't know where this ends, Emily. But thank you for telling me the truth. And with that, he left. Emily sat there long after the door closed, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade down the hall. The apartment felt too big, too quiet, too honest. She looked at the cold coffee on the table and whispered to no one in particular. I hope someday he can see me again, not as what I did, but as who I'm trying to become. Outside, the clouds finally broke apart, and for the first time in months, the light came through. The house felt different without Michael, quieter, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that pressed against Emily's thoughts, forcing her to confront the echoes she had tried to avoid for months. In the first few days, she walked through their apartment as if retracing a dream. The empty chair at the kitchen table, the half-folded blanket on the couch, his coffee mug still sitting by the sink. All of it reminded her that absence could be louder than presence. On the third night, she opened her laptop and began to write. Dear Michael, I keep thinking about the way you looked at me before you left. You weren't angry, and somehow, that made it hurt more. I don't know how to talk to you anymore, so maybe I'll start like this. Maybe I'll write until the words make sense again. I miss the sound of you moving through the house in the morning. I miss the way you used to hum while making coffee, off-key, but steady. I miss the version of us that laughed without effort. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I see what I broke, and I see what you tried to save. She didn't send it. Instead, she saved it as a draft, then closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the city outside her window. A few miles away, Michael was sitting at his brother's small kitchen table, staring at his phone. His brother had gone to bed, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The apartment was simple, mismatched chairs, the faint smell of paint from an unfinished project, but it felt strangely comforting. He reached for a notepad and began to write too. Dear Emily, I'm not sure why I'm doing this. Maybe because silence feels heavier than words. You said you didn't want to hurt me, but the truth is, hurt isn't what stays. It's the emptiness that follows it. I've been thinking about how we got here. There wasn't one moment. It was hundreds of small ones. Missed glances, unspoken things, moments where we both chose comfort over courage. You said I stopped seeing you. Maybe you're right. Maybe I stopped showing you that I still did. I don't know what happens next. I just know I don't want to hate you. M. He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, though he knew he would never mail it. Days turned into weeks. Both kept writing, letters that never reached the other. Some were long and rambling, others just a few lines. They wrote when they couldn't sleep, when the silence became unbearable, when memories arrived uninvited. Sometimes Emily would write about her art, how she had started painting again, alone, without anyone's approval. Sometimes Michael would write about small things, a walk by the river, a song that reminded him of her, a thought he couldn't shake. In different rooms, in different lives, they began to rebuild something fragile. Not their marriage, not yet, but themselves. One evening, Emily sat by the window with a sketchbook open on her lap. The page was blank except for the faint outline of a bridge, long, uncertain, stretching between two distant shores. She smiled softly, remembering his words. Forgiveness isn't a door. It's a bridge. She wrote one final letter that night. Dear Michael, maybe we'll find our way back someday. Maybe we won't. But I want you to know I'm walking toward that bridge, one small step at a time. If you ever look up and see me on the other side, I'll be waiting. She placed it in an envelope, sealed it carefully, and tucked it inside the book they once shared, the travel guide to the coast they never reached again. She didn't need to send it. Some words were meant to be carried, not delivered. It had been 3 months since Emily last saw Michael. The air had shifted, not heavy anymore, just different. She'd started teaching art classes at a community center, working with children who painted with more heart than technique. Their laughter filled the space in her life that used to echo. One rainy afternoon, as she packed up brushes and watercolor sets, she noticed an old book sitting on the windowsill. It was the Coastal Road Trip Guide, the one she and Michael once kept in the car, filled with bookmarks and doodles in the margins. She smiled wistfully, flipping through the pages. And then, an envelope fell out. Her breath caught. She turned it over. Her handwriting stared back at her. To Michael. Her hands trembled slightly. She had forgotten she'd tucked it there, the last letter she'd written but never sent. Somehow, during her recent move, the book must have slipped into one of her boxes, waiting silently to be found. She hesitated, then placed the envelope on her desk, deciding to drop it in the mail the next morning. She didn't expect anything. Maybe she just wanted to let go, properly this time. 2 days later, Michael was walking back from work when he found a small white envelope in his mailbox. No return address, just his name, written in familiar, looping handwriting. He froze. For a moment, he thought about leaving it unopened, some part of him afraid of reopening old wounds. But curiosity, or maybe something softer, won. He tore it open and unfolded the single page. Dear Michael, maybe we'll find our way back someday. Maybe we won't. But I want you to know I'm walking toward that bridge, one small step at a time. If you ever look up and see me on the other side, I'll be waiting. Michael stared at the letter for a long time. His eyes traced the gentle slant of her words, the quiet tone that felt more like peace than sorrow. He didn't realize he was smiling until the corners of his mouth lifted on their own. He folded the paper carefully, the way you'd fold something fragile, and slipped it back into the envelope. That night, he drove without a destination, past old coffee shops, the park they once walked through, the bridge where they used to watch the sunset. He parked near the water, leaned against the railing, and let the wind push through his hair. He whispered into the wind, almost like a prayer. I see you, Emily. Meanwhile, Emily was sitting by her own window, painting the same bridge again, this time with a soft figure standing on one side, looking across the water. She didn't know why, but her chest felt lighter, her breathing calmer. Somewhere deep inside, she knew he had read her letter. And that was enough. It was late afternoon in early autumn, the kind of day when the air smells like rain and fallen leaves. Emily had just finished teaching her last class of the week. The children's laughter still lingered in her ears as she walked home through the park. She liked taking the long route, past the trees with golden crowns, the coffee stand that always played soft jazz, and the small bridge over the river. She hadn't been to that bridge in months. Something about it made her both ache and feel alive, a strange, beautiful contradiction she couldn't quite explain. She stopped halfway across, resting her hands on the cool railing. The water shimmered below, rippling with the wind. She took a deep breath and smiled to herself, remembering the last letter she had sent, or rather, finally mailed. It had felt like closing a door gently, not slamming it shut. Peaceful. Final. Or so she thought. On the other side of the city, Michael was driving aimlessly again. He had been meaning to call his brother, but ended up turning onto a familiar road instead. When he saw the bridge up ahead, something stirred in him, a quiet pull, like a memory that refused to fade. He parked nearby and began to walk, hands in his pockets, coat collar up against the chill. And that's when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection in the water or his imagination playing cruel games. But as he stepped closer, the shape didn't vanish. She was really there, standing in the middle of the bridge, her hair moving softly in the wind, the same way it always had. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just watched her, the woman he once loved, the woman he might never stop loving. Emily turned, sensing someone behind her. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was full, like the pause before music begins. Hi, she said finally, her voice small but steady. Hi, he answered, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She looked down at the water. Didn't expect to see you here. Me neither, he said. Guess we both had the same idea. Emily laughed quietly. Seems like we always end up meeting halfway. He nodded. Yeah, maybe that's what we're good at. They both leaned on the railing, side by side, the space between them filled with a gentle kind of warmth. Not the fire of old passion, but something steadier, like sunlight after a long storm. After a few minutes, Emily spoke again. I got your letter. He turned to her, surprised. My letter? She smiled. The one you never sent. It was in one of your notebooks. You must have left it at the house. I found it a while ago. He blinked, processing her words. And you read it? Yes, she said softly. It helped. He nodded slowly, emotion tightening in his chest. I'm glad. They stood there for a while longer, watching the water move beneath them. Two people no longer defined by what went wrong, but by the courage to meet again. When they finally parted ways, there were no promises, no dramatic words. Just a quiet understanding. Some bridges weren't built to lead you back, only to help you cross once more and see that the other side isn't so far after all. The weeks following their unexpected meeting on the bridge passed with a new kind of quiet. Michael and Emily didn't rush to call each other, didn't send endless messages. They simply existed with the knowledge that the other was out there, and that sometimes the smallest gestures mattered more than grand declarations. Michael returned to his apartment, but now it didn't feel empty. There was a sense of purpose in the air, a clarity that came from seeing Emily and realizing that some connections, even fractured ones, could still be nurtured. Emily, meanwhile, focused on her art and teaching, but she left her sketchbook open by the window every evening, a silent invitation for reflection, for thoughts to settle. Then, one Saturday morning, Michael sent a simple message. Coffee. At the little cafe near the river. 10 a.m. Emily smiled when she read it. The message was calm, casual, and yet full of meaning. She typed back, "See you there." The cafe was quiet when they arrived, sunlight spilling across the tables, a gentle warmth filling the space. They sat across from each other, smiling in a way that had nothing to prove, nothing to hide. Michael ordered black coffee. Emily chose tea. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, noting the small changes, the calm in his posture, the confidence in her hands as she held her cup. It's been strange, Michael said finally. Seeing you again. Not as a confrontation, not as a fight, just here. Emily nodded. I know. It feels like we're stepping into a new story, one we get to write carefully this time. He reached across the table, a tentative gesture, and she didn't pull away. Their hands brushed lightly, a touch that said more than words could. It's not the same as before, Michael said. I don't want to pretend it is, but maybe we can start again. Slowly. Emily smiled, her eyes glistening. Slowly is good. We've both learned patience. They talked for hours that morning, about small things, ordinary things, and about the lessons they had carried from months apart. They laughed at old memories and shared new dreams. There were no promises, no labels, no rush. Only the understanding that they had reached a moment where the past could be acknowledged without being a cage. When they left the cafe, they walked together through the park. The bridge that had once been a symbol of distance now felt like a quiet guidepost, a reminder that they could choose to meet again, not as they once were, but as who they had become. Michael glanced at Emily and said softly, You know, I think this might actually work. Emily laughed gently. I think so too. And if it doesn't, at least we tried with honesty. The city around them continued to hum, indifferent and constant. But for the first time, their world felt aligned. One step, one conversation, one coffee at a time, a second beginning. The morning sun spilled golden light across the city, warm enough to melt the last traces of autumn frost. Michael and Emily stood at the foot of the bridge, the same one where they had first met again, and looked out over the river together. The air was crisp, filled with possibility. It smelled of rain, leaves, and the quiet hope that comes after months of tension and distance. I've been thinking, Emily said, her voice calm but deliberate. About us. About what comes next. Michael nodded. He had been thinking too, about all the letters, the silences, the moments of fear and hope, the long stretches of alone time that had reshaped both of them. And I realized, she continued, that I don't want to go back to the way things were. I don't want to pretend that nothing happened, but I do want to move forward with you. Carefully, honestly, every step at a time. Michael reached for her hand. It felt familiar and new all at once. I don't want to rush anything either. I just want the chance to build something real with you. Something that isn't afraid of mistakes, because we've already made them, and we can learn from them. Emily's eyes glistened. Then let's make that choice together. Not because we're scared of being apart, not because it's comfortable, but because we want this. Michael smiled, the kind of smile that reaches deep into the heart. Then we choose. They stood there for a long moment, hands intertwined, watching the water shimmer in the sunlight. Around them, the city moved as usual, people hurrying by, oblivious to the quiet reconciliation happening on the bridge. But in that instant, nothing else mattered. The past was acknowledged. The mistakes were forgiven, if not forgotten. And the future stretched out ahead of them, uncertain, beautiful, and entirely theirs to write. Michael turned to Emily. "One step at a time." "One step at a time," she echoed. And together, they crossed the bridge, not into the past, not clinging to what was lost, but into a shared tomorrow, built on honesty, patience, and the courage to choose each other again. The wind carried a soft promise through the trees, the kind of promise that comes when two people finally decide to face the world side by side. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, Michael and Emily felt truly free.